Former President Trump, facing questions about his influence over the Republican Party, on Tuesday announced his entry into the 2024 race for the White House. Trump made the announcement during a much anticipated event at Mar a Lago, his private estate and club in Palm Beach, Florida, just a week after a lackluster midterm election performance denied Republicans the red wave they had long anticipated and led to days of finger pointing within the party. Flanked by a dozen American flags in a gilded ballroom, Trump delivered a winding speech in which he boasted about and often exaggerated his record in the Oval Office and defended his party's midterm performance, claiming that Republicans had taken over Congress and fired House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Of other Republican midterm failures, Trump claimed that Americans had not yet realized the full extent and gravity of the pain our nation is going through. We always have known that this was not the end, it was only the beginning of our fight to rescue the American dream, Trump said. In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. The former president on Tuesday made good on months of hinting that he could mount a comeback bid after losing re-election to President Biden in 2020. Since then, Trump has continued to cling to his false claim that widespread voter fraud and systematic irregularities robbed him of a second term in the White House. Allegations some of the parties say cost them crucial midterm races. Even announcing his latest campaign on Tuesday, Trump suggested that China may have played a very active role in the 2020 election. He also insisted that only paper ballots should be used in elections and called for early voting to be abolished, undermining recent calls from some Republicans for the party to focus more on early and mail in voting. Tuesday marked the beginning of Trump's fourth presidential campaign, although only the third in which he is running as a serious political figure. But he is entering the 2024 race in a very different position than he was in when he launched his first successful bid for the Oval Office in 2015. He is no longer just a businessman and reality TV star who won over Republican voters with his bombastic and controversial promises to build the wall at the U.S. southern border and drain the swamp in Washington. To many Americans, Trump is a political pariah who sought to cast aside the peaceful transfer of power between presidential administrations in order to preserve his reputation as a winner in all facets of life. Trump's efforts to turn over his 2020 electoral loss have put him at the center of a congressional investigation, isolating him from the biggest social media platforms, including Twitter, the site that once helped him build up his political profile. He has also found himself at the center of a complex web of legal threats, ranging from investigations into his business to probes into his role in the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol. In August, FBI agents raided his Mar-a-Lago estate in South Florida as part of an inquiry into classified documents being kept there, an unprecedented move, though one Trump sought to cast as politically motivated. He is also heading into his campaign in a weakened state. Republicans have long anticipated a so-called red wave in 2022, believing that resentment of Biden and his party's control of Congress would sweep them into the majority. Instead, the elections yield a significantly cloudier picture of the country. While Republicans are poised to capture a narrow majority in the House, they missed out on an opportunity to take control of the Senate, a failure that many Republicans blame on Trump and his repeated interventions in Republican primaries. In fact, some advisors repeatedly urged Trump to delay his announcement until more time had passed after the midterms. But to other Americans, he remains a visionary who sought to bulldoze an opaque federal bureaucracy and advocate for the United States' best interest in an increasingly globalized, interconnected world. And indeed, there are no signs that Trump may seek to turn over a new leaf in his 2024 presidential bid. His announcement on Tuesday echoed the themes that had defined his political career. He described Americans as being in a weakened state under Biden, railing against what he dubbed out of control inflation and immigration, claiming that China had once again begun taking advantage of the U.S. He said that his presidency had brought about a golden age in the U.S. Now, he said, America is a nation in decline. Under our leadership, we were a great and glorious nation, something you haven't heard for quite a long period of time, he said. Now we are in a nation in decline. We are a failing nation. For millions of Americans, the past 2 years under Joe Biden have been a time of pain, hardship, and despair. At times, however, Trump's speech was more subdued in his normal fiery tirades. He didn't speak at length about his false claim that the 2020 election was rigged against him and sought to project a calm in the face of his party's lackluster midterm election performance. He spoke for more than an hour to a crowd of supporters, including staunch political allies like Mike Lindell, the ultra-conservative businessman known for selling pillows. I didn't even get to see the sun popping up me like that. So at times his audience appeared unenthusiastic. Trump drew applause and chants throughout his speech, but the response was often subdued compared to the raunchiest atmosphere of his larger rallies. While not entirely unexpected, his entry into the 2024 presidential race comes at an unusual time. While the midterm elections have passed, there are still 3 weeks until a runoff election in Georgia, and some Republicans fear the effect a Trump presidential campaign will have on their campaign in the state. And while Trump remains by and large the most popular figure in the modern GOP, there are questions about whether he is the best standard bearer for the political movement he started 7 years ago. He remains unpopular among most voters. Exit polls from 2022 midterm elections found that Trump is less popular than Biden, whose favorability rating has sunk deep underwater. A political morning consult poll released on Tuesday found that 65% of voters do not believe Trump should mount another bid for the White House. Most early polling shows him as the frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential nod, but there are signs that other prospective candidates' procedures may be catching up. Most notably, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. A growing number of Republicans see DeSantis, a longtime Trump ally, as a top-tier pick for the White House. While DeSantis has downplayed the notion that he has presidential ambitions, he hasn't ruled out a 2024 bid. Straightening his argument for a presidential run was the fact he notched a 19-point landslide victory in the midterm that sent him to a second term with a governing mandate. His swelling profile among Republicans nationally may be one of the reasons that Trump decided to jump in the race so early, according to multiple party operatives and strategists. The president wants to get ahead of the curve, one GOP donor who requested anonymity to speak openly about the dynamics of the budding 2024 race said. I think he knows that every day he's losing a little bit more relevance. The idea is put yourself out there before someone else comes along. That was a long article. Man, the stuff I do for this website. I don't usually even read the full thing, but because this is a pretty historic event, I felt compelled to. So, Trump is trying to become the first U.S. president since Grover Cleveland to win a non-consecutive second term, which was over 100 years ago. And I always think back to that period from 2015 up until the election took place the following year, where a lot of his appeal was being this wild card who was talking about, middle class issues and, economic related stuff that resonated with certain people who felt ostracized by the administration and their ideas and policies. But what's crazy to me is that now he's a completely different beast. He's not this rising star who has a record that we can't really check on because he's never been elected to anything. He was president for 4 years, and we know that he governed in a conservative way. So a lot of that mystique and wild card wonder has been completely eviscerated. And when the article mentions that like 65% of voters don't like him, or don't want him to run for another term, that's not even a Trump-related issue, because just in general, Americans don't support, and this is why former presidents only have one term don't even bother anymore. They don't support a one-term president trying to get a non-consecutive second term, because they feel as if that person had their chance, they blew it, time to hand the reins over to somebody else. I remember I predicted he would lose when he ran the first time. I didn't know what to think when he ran the second time. Sometimes I thought he could win, sometimes I thought he was going to lose. With this, and again, if I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to come back and play the video and say I made a mistake. Not only do I think he can't win the general election, I don't even think he can win the well, I'm not going to say he can't win the primary, but I think if he does win it, it's not going to be that easy. I always think about how with Clinton, right, when she before she ran against Sanders in 2016, we had all these polls that showed her as the number one top choice. She was just blowing out everybody in the different respective polls that they would do. And then after she started running and being out there and talking, her approval rating and popularity went down. And she actually was given somewhat of competition by him. With Trump, because he's never gone into seclusion where we just don't hear about him for a few years, or some other duration of time that of absence making the heart grow fonder, not unlike George W. and his absence that he had when Obama was in office. It's very difficult for voters for independent voters, people that are not supporters of his, people that are are not Republicans, people that are supposed to be that middle group that can be um, convinced of something, right? It's very difficult for me to believe they're going to look at him and say, "Oh yes, this is the person we want to support." Um, and I'm telling you, it's him not having that wild card aspect anymore is really going to hurt him. With Republican voters, it's a little bit more dubious because he does have high favorability with them, but I still think the aspect of you're a has been is in effect, meaning that he may be liked by voters in his party, but when you put him up against the people that they don't know how they would govern as president, like DeSantis, Cruz, Rubio, any of the rest of them, it's going to be a lot harder for him to stake out a unique place for himself. Even if I do think I probably would prefer him over DeSantis, but that's a story for another video. Just that's my personal preference. Um, I just can't see him making it. The only path where I think he could just swipe and destroy everybody is if we get a repeat of 2016 where there's like 12, 13, 17 people running and all of them are splitting the anti-Trump vote, and he just has his, coalition of cultists who vote for him in every state, and then he picks it up that way. But I don't really know if that's going to be what happens here, because if you notice, you're not seeing that many candidates talking about running. You don't see really anyone's name getting mentioned besides what, three, four, five people. You hear DeSantis over and over again. You've heard a little bit about Haley, but as far as from the candidates themselves, I don't think the field is going to be as big as it was 8 years ago, or I guess at this point 6 years ago. And a general election, he can forget about. Like I said, when he campaigned in 2016, and even a little bit in his second run, and you talk about the forgotten men and women, outsourcing, a little bit of healthcare stuff too, some foreign policy stuff as well, Bush lying us in Iraq. These are things that resonate with voters because they're actual policy issues that are being spoken about, even if we don't have any, like actual record of his to attach it to. They're being spoken of in some populist way. But I just don't see that carrying him because that January 6th event from last year was insane. And I can't see regular, middle of the road people that don't pay attention to this stuff going, "Oh yes, the person who not only lied and said that they didn't lose an election, but basically couldn't even condemn their own supporters when they tried to storm the Capitol and threaten elected officials with violence if they didn't change the results to what they wanted." Yeah, that's who I want back in the White House. I just can't see it. I think his supporters will be fine with anything, but and that's why I said he does. I think he, and I don't say this with any happiness, he does have some chance of getting the nomination, even however small it may be. But the general election, I just don't see it. I think that the Democrats could pretty much run anybody because there's a chance Biden might not run, but I think he will. And you're just not going to see people go for that. Like what he did, the lying about the election is whatever because he did all kind of conspiracy theory-esque stuff even back when he ran the first time, like when he said that Cruz's dad was was friends with Lee Harvey Oswald, some kind of goofy thing. But First, you lie about losing, and then that lie indirectly causes a bunch of your rabid supporters to storm the Capitol and threaten law abiding, not law abiding, but democratically elected people with violence if they don't overturn the election in your favor. So I can't see people in the middle actually going for that. Um, I don't know. I don't want to underestimate him because I feel I did that when he ran the first time. But I think I might be overestimating him because I'm going off of popularity polls when I say he could win the primary, but that still has not yet been tested. So, and it's been over. We have a year left before any voting even takes place. So who knows how much stuff could change between now and then? But it is a significant announcement since we haven't had a former president run for president again since what, Herbert Hoover. Uh, So we'll see what happens, but I think he really has destroyed his own chances with the way he acted after the 2020 election. If he had accepted his loss graciously, and had condemned his supporters doing that crazy stuff, I really think he would have had the chance of convincing some more people that he was going to do something to help them. But at this point, it just seems like an ego trip, and I was reminded of this. But at one point during his like the second half of his term, he had said it's like 2021, 2000 excuse me 2020, 2019. He was talking about how Obama spying on him made it eligible for him to get a third term. Just complete utter nonsense, which is why a lot of people have been afraid of the possibility of him trying to run again after losing, because it's as if he feels he's owed a second term regardless of how impossible the circumstances have made it for that to happen. But we'll see what happens. This is going to be a very interesting campaign because, again, the unique circumstances and just what is he going to do for months of being the only major candidate in the race, just campaign against himself, just traveling across, giving speeches with the little red hat, repeating the same lies over and over.